Right now, let's go to my first guest this morning. He's Colonel James Sunderland. He's a Conservative MP and joins us. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I do want to talk to you about lots of things going on at home, but I'd love to get your response, first of all, to what President Zelensky has said, claiming that Russian forces, he believes, have placed objects resembling explosives, I don't know what that means other than explosives, on the roof of some buildings at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine. What do you make of that?
Well, look, one of the beauties of coming on your show, Julia, is that I've no idea what you're going to ask me. It really is a box of chocolates for 7 o'clock in the morning. But it's great being on, and thank you once again for the invitation.
He's stalling, guys. He's stalling.
I'm pretty clear on this. I mean, I think we've seen a pattern of behaviour from the Russians during the whole sordid episode of the Ukraine conflict, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if that is true. We've seen a pattern of disruption and destruction of infrastructure, of dams. We've seen targeting of women, children, hospitals, civilian areas. It wouldn't surprise me at all if when the Russians find withdrawal, which they will, I think they're going to leave behind a complete train of destruction and probably enough explosives and booby traps and mines to keep the Halo Trust very busy for a long time.
Yeah, indeed. It's very, very tragic, isn't it? Let's also talk about what's happening at home here. The 75th anniversary of the NHS. Extraordinary. The Prime Minister is going to miss PMQs today and indeed next week. That's for a NATO summit. Fair enough. Today, though, he and Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, are going to be attending sort of a service of thanksgiving, as if in some way the NHS is some religious creation, this sacred cow that we all must worship today to mark the 70th anniversary. I'm assuming, though, that event could have been held after or before PMQs, but no, apparently it takes precedence. Do you agree with the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, who says that there should be evolution, not revolution in the NHS, and it can prosper without drastic change?
Yeah, look, I mean, to a certain extent, I think today is an important day for the NHS. It's an important day for the UK. So let's have one day at least where we don't overly politicise the NHS. Let's have one day where we celebrate all of the fantastic achievements of the last 75 years. And the NHS is prized. It's very important, and the people that work there and for the NHS do a fantastic job.
Do they?
But in terms
do they? You've got 7.4 million people on waiting list. It closed down for 6 months to pretty much anyone who wasn't an 80-year-old with COVID. I mean, what way is it doing a brilliant job?
Well, look, I'm not going to criticise those fantastic key workers who work there and do a brilliant job.
They don't all do a brilliant job, do they? We know they don't all do a brilliant job because we know we've seen numerous cases where we've seen unnecessary deaths in maternity wards and other wards because of the failure of care. Can we stop this idea? Look, everyone I work with in every office I've ever worked in is not brilliant and wonderful at their job. Everyone who works as a nurse or a doctor or a teacher, they're not all saints. They're doing a job.
I get it completely. I'm an army guy. I've had many working for me and with me over the years, so I get what public servants do and how important they are. You're not going to find me being critical of key workers in the NHS. But what I would say
I think that's the problem. I'm sorry, with all due respect, I think that's the problem.
Bear with me. The important thing for me is that we sort the management of the NHS out. We make it more efficient.
Yep.
£180 billion going in at the moment. Record sums. I mean, the government is doing exactly what it can to keep the NHS afloat and to keep maintaining these services, but there's work to do. And when Steve Barclay says it's evolution, not revolution, I agree to a certain extent. But what we're going to have to do is improve efficiency and expedite improvements across the whole service, as indeed we'll need to do with the civil service and other government institutions. Days of just throwing money at things without any return on the investment, I'm afraid, are over.
Well, this is it. We're throwing money at the wrong things, aren't we? More diversity officers and the like, management getting paid a fortune, time servers like Amanda Pritchard as the chief executive, and then there we are. We haven't got enough doctors or nurses or MRI scanners, and we've got the lowest ratio of doctors, nurses, beds and equipment to the head of the population of pretty much any Western nation. So we're spending similar amounts to other nations. We're spending the record amount right now, and yet we don't have money spent on the stuff that actually makes a difference to whether or not people live or die.
I agree with you. There's so much in that. I mean, for example, locally, we've got GPs on contract wages, locums, working for 3 or 4 days a week on stupid money. I mean, money that most of us would regard as eye-watering. So let's bring doctors back in. Let's give them contracts of 5 days a week or more. We've got to find more staff.
Well, you have to train doctors. I mean, David Cameron decided not to train more doctors.
So this is all about now doing what is necessary, throwing the kitchen sink at the NHS. But that does not mean throwing loads of money. It means actually holding managers to account. It's about holding the institution to account and making sure that the NHS is held responsible for running the NHS, because it's government money, it's taxpayers' money.
OK, all right then. Well, we shall see. I mean, lowest satisfaction ratings ever since the pandemic. And again, we know a lot of those waiting lists were pretty high beforehand, but of course they perhaps weren't focused on as much. Let's also talk about something which I just find extraordinary. It doesn't make it on the front page of pretty much any newspaper, and no newspaper at all today. The National Education Union, a nationwide strike across England today. We've had strikes which are regional, some strikes that are national today and Friday. Millions of children are going to miss out on school. Millions of parents are going to miss out going to work because they can't get there, because they can't get last-minute childcare. It is extraordinary this strike is ongoing, and yet there doesn't seem to be much political or even public concern about it. Have we just decided that kids' education doesn't matter?
Well, I think first thing, I think we're just pretty bored of strikes and these people who go on strike. I worked for an organisation for a long time that didn't go on strike. You know, this is not about throwing your teddies out of the pram if you don't get paid what you want. This is actually about finding a reasonable wage for those who are working in the public sector. But by the same token, you don't just go on strike because you don't get what you want. This is about our children. This is about our schools. Our children suffered badly during the pandemic. We've had mental health outbreak because kids aren't in school. The list goes on. I'm afraid I would urge all of our teachers to get back into the classroom, because that's where they need to be, and our kids need them there.
Teachers' Union, NEU, would argue, well, you know, you do go on strike when you don't get what you want. That's literally the point of going on strike.
Yeah, but it's not a philosophy that I subscribe to particularly. You know, we want more money, we want more pay. Expectations are very high across the UK at the moment. The country's £2.4 trillion in the red. We can't necessarily afford what everybody wants. So this is about pragmatic decision-making. This is about calm and stable government. Rishi's providing that. And I would urge teachers to go back to work, because what's on the table as a pay settlement now is entirely reasonable.
Let's also talk about the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. You just brought him up there. He was attending the liaison committee yesterday. It's heads of all the select committees. Interesting, Sir Bernard Jenkins was there, who's also in the news today. I'll ask you about that. But we had an interesting clash between the Labour MP Chris Bryant, who loves grandstanding, it has to be said, over Rishi Sunak's failure to attend the parliamentary vote on whether or not to suspend Boris Johnson or not. Let's have a very quick listen to that.
You didn't turn up for the Boris Johnson votes at all, did you?
No, I was at a charity dinner for Jewish care.
I think that's some cutting it fine, I would argue, since other members of Parliament who were at the same dinner with you and left after you did manage to get back for the vote.
I think, with greatest respect, I think their role and my role at the dinner probably slightly different.
You chose not to be there, didn't you? That's twice. On two rule-breaking moments, you chose not to be in Parliament. But yesterday, you opined on the rules of cricket. Take us through that.
I chose to fulfil my obligation to an incredible charity for whom that is one of their significant fundraising moments of the year.
It is an absolute mystery to me, I have to say, Colonel James Sunderland, that Chris Bryant does not get punched in the face on a regular basis by his colleagues in Commons. I'm not encouraging anyone to do so. I don't endorse violence, but the tone that man takes with most people, and most of us in journalism will have had a text message or two from Chris Bryant along the same lines, I have to say. I mean, the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister. He could be treated with a tad more respect, in my view. But is there an issue with the Prime Minister not sort of attending key parliamentary votes when it comes to, you know, getting off the fence when it comes to Boris Johnson, Partygate and all of that? Does any of that matter?
No, I think it's very easy to criticise the Prime Minister. I'm not going to do that. No surprise there whatsoever. I mean, I think he's doing a good job. Got to get behind him, and he's working really hard for the people of this country. But what I would say is that when he turned up yesterday for the liaison committee session, I mean, poor bloke, he gets an absolute mauling from 17 or so chairs of select committees.
Many of them Tory MPs, by the way.
Well, agreed, and he's not hiding to nothing. You know, he turns up, he's sat on his own, he's in the full flare of the camera, and he's asked about anything that anybody wants to ask him. So he's having to be very agile and flexible. I thought he did very well, actually, and I can't speak for him in terms of why he's not in Westminster for certain votes, but he is the Prime Minister. He's got an amazingly busy job. His diary is eye-watering, and we have to let him get on for the job. that he's entrusted to do, and he's doing a good job.
And just finally, in terms of doing a good job, front page of the Telegraph today saying that US President Joe Biden wants the European Union Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to take over as the next NATO Secretary General in a year's time when Jens Stoltenberg stands down. We understand it was Joe Biden who blocked our Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, a proper military man with experience, from taking that job. What would you make of the idea of someone who was only put into the EU job because she was a failed defence minister and, frankly, Merkel and others wanted to get rid of her, taking over as a NATO Secretary-General?
Well, politics is a murky, mucky business, isn't it? There are those much better than me who are expert in the dark arts. I'm afraid I play with a very straight bat and call it out and say things as they are, and that's what you'd expect as a military man. But what I would say is that Ben Wallace, who I know very well personally, would be and would have been a fantastic Secretary-General. He's got all of the ticks in the boxes. He's been a fantastic Defence Secretary, consistently ranked #1 in the Cabinet. And I have to say, I'm disappointed if what I hear is true of the stance of our allies who have blocked that appointment.
I'm just very worried.
Let's give it to those who can do the job, not those to satisfy some kind of political itch.
Indeed, Ursula von der Leyen is not anyone's first choice, apart from Joe Biden, as I would suggest. Great to talk to you, Colonel James Sunderland. Thank you very much indeed.